Let's go ahead and set up our project and workspace. Now, if you've never done this before, you might want to watch the entire video first and then start from the beginning after you do that. For everyone else, let's go ahead and open up Terminal or PowerShell. I'm going to cd into my dev folder. This, of course, is a folder I created to hold all of my projects. In here, I'm going to make a directory called Django Flix, and then we'll cd into Django Flix, and then we're going to create our virtual environment. Now, the Python 3 version I'm using is simply 3.9.2, and if you're on Windows, you're probably going to type out Python-V. Just make sure that you're using at least 3.6 and above. So with Python 3 installed, I'm going to go ahead and run Python 3-m venv, and then do a period at the end because I'm already in the workspace folder that I want to be in, which in this case is Django Flix. And of course, that's actually going to initialize a virtual environment for me. If you have never used a virtual environment, basically it keeps our versions separated from other projects, which is really, really important, right? So let's talking about versions. Let's go ahead and install the version of Django we want. So first I need to activate my virtual environment. Mac and Linux users, it's source bin/activate like I wrote there. And then you Windows users, it's scripts/activate. And that activates your virtual environment. And we can run pip freeze in here. And I can also run Python-V. And it should be the Python version that you used to actually initialize that virtual environment. Not a big surprise, hopefully. Okay, so now that we've got that installed, I'm going to install the latest version of Django 3.2. So I'll do pip install, and then I want to put in an empty string. And then inside of that empty string, I'm going to do Django is greater than or equal to 3.2, and then put a comma, and then less than 4.0. If you've never seen this before, this is like one of my new favorite commands because it gives me the latest version of 3.2 if it's available. If I hit enter, it's not available. I have no matching distribution found for something between those versions. Now that's because at the time of this recording, only the beta version of 3.2 is out. So that's what I'll actually end up installing. But this command is what you'll want to use going forward for 3.2. So what that means is I'm actually going to go ahead and actually add that command. So Django and greater than or equal to 3.2 and then comma less than 4.0. I'm going to add that into my actual requirements.txt. So that command, I'm going to go ahead and echo it into my requirements.txt. So Django greater than or equal to 3.2, less than 4.0, and then we just go into requirements.txt. That will add it to that requirements file, which we can see by opening that requirements file or just doing cat requirements.txt. That shows me that that's in there. So this means I can just do pip install-r requirements.txt. And of course, I still get that problem, right? This is actually a good thing to do when you go into production as well, so that the latest security release from Django is available for that particular version. Now, of course, if you want to be more specific and you want to use between 3.2 and 3.3, you totally can, and that would still give us the same value as far as 3.2 is concerned. So it's a nice shortcut way to actually just make sure that we're using the correct version and the latest one. Cool. So now what I want to do is just add this into my text editor. And of course, I'm going to be using VS Code. So inside of VS Code, I'll go ahead and open up this folder. We'll navigate into that dev folder again, Django Flix, open that up. And then I'll go ahead and save this workspace as Django Flix. Okay, cool. So now, if you've never done these things before, you're going to be hopefully a little confused, but let's go ahead and make it a little bit more clear. First and foremost, the version of Django, right? So on djangoproject.com/download, you'll see the latest version. This is the latest supported version that Django has released. That doesn't mean it's the only version it's released recently or at all. It just means it's the latest. And right now it's 3.1.7. So I don't have the requirement to use 3.1.7. I have the requirement to use 3.2. So the cool thing about PyPy and Python is we can install the specific version that we want. And the way I did it was not to install the explicit specific version, but instead a range of versions that fit in this category. So in other words, if I had the requirement of using Django 3.1, what I would have done is change this to 3.1 up to 3.2. That way I get the latest official release of 3.1. And of course, you could always check those numbers on the djangoproject.org/download under previous releases on the right-hand side, or even unsupported previous releases, as in they don't get security updates or bug fixes any longer, but they're still available. You can still download them, which I think is really cool. So you can actually see the changes in Django over time. But the security issues, that's what that's talking about, is when you go into production. That is when you actually want real users using it. But you can totally learn from those older versions still, regardless of the video that you're watching. So that's Django, right? The next thing is Python. Which version of Python am I going to use and from where? So you're going to want to download Python from python.org all the time. And if you have macOS, you can go to that link, or you can just click on downloads and then find what system you're using. And if you are using Windows, just make sure you download the installer version. That's by far the easiest way to install Python, whatever version that is. And it does have some requirements on it. And of course, if the installer version is just not available, then go to the other version of that. So in this case, 3.6.13 doesn't have an installer. So I would just actually go down, keep scrolling down until I find a 3.6 that does. So 3.6.12 doesn't, and then so on. Like you would just keep scrolling. There's a lot of different versions. 3.6.9 doesn't. Hey, what do you know? 3.6.8. Finally, I found an installer. Again, that's the easiest way to install it without any issues. And now, if you're an Anaconda user, don't use Anaconda for our virtual environment. Use python.org. Anaconda and Django just don't play that well together. And then if you want to verify which version of Python Django supports, going into pypy.org/project/Django will show you this. So this is how Django is actually distributed through pip. So if you scroll down on the left-hand side, you'll see the version of Django, the version of Python that Django supports. So 3.9 is the version we're using. 3.9 is the latest version of Python, but unfortunately, not every package uses 3.9. So if for some reason I need to change to 3.6 or 3.7 or 3.8, I totally will do that if it's necessary, but I'll do it at that time and explain how to make changes then. But the key for changing versions of Python is having a requirements.txt file that you add the actual code requirements that you have. Right now, we just have Django, so we're good to go there. Next, of course, I'm going to be using VS Code, but you can use whatever text editor you want, whatever code editor you want, like Sublime Text or Atom or any of those. So feel free to pick that. And finally, the code itself, the final code, it will be on GitHub. So I'm going to have the code committed after every lesson. Now, if you don't know what that means, just keep in mind that all of the code will be available so you can reference it if you get stuck at all. You can also install directly from GitHub as well and download all the code as you need. All right, so that's setting up our project in Workspace. Now, I'm assuming that those of you who are beginners watch this whole thing and you're probably maybe a little confused. So if you're having any struggle and you have no idea what I'm talking about here, then it's probably a good idea to actually go and take a look at the requirements for this project in general. So on our project page, go to see, you probably need to learn 30 days of Python. You might need to do try Django to actually get to this point, because I kind of assume that you already have. Cool. So now let's go ahead and talk about what we are going to be building. Let's craft our to-do list for this project.